Okay, so what does that look like for Ed Stetzer then? I mean, you've been involved in a few things. I think lots of church plants and all this kind of stuff. Just in a nutshell, what's your ministry look like to this point?
Well, from the very beginning, I guess I've been involved in church planting. I planted my first church among the urban poor in Buffalo, New York, in 1988, and for us, we sold our most of our stuff, just kept a couch and some books, and we moved into the inner city of Buffalo, New York, among the urban poor, and began to plant a multicultural, multiracial church there. We wanted to tell the gospel, but we wanted to also be and do the gospel. So our focus was to be, do, tell the gospel. We serve the hurting, but we serve the hurting in the name and for the fame of Jesus. And so we did that and planted our first church. I planted churches then in Pennsylvania. I was a professor at Southern Seminary for a few years, teaching some of the things we'd learned along the way. And now I've been doing research for the last few years. I'm now the director of research at Lifeway Research.
That's interesting. So the first thing you mentioned there was about cross-cultural churches, and back in 1988, that can't have been terribly common, I don't think, really, was it?
Well, church planting back. Yeah, church planting in 1988. Everyone kind of asked me, could I not find a real job? Church planting is now big now, but back then people were beating on church planters like a low-hanging piñata on Cinco de Mayo. I mean, folks were just they thought they couldn't get real jobs, were splitting the church. But we went to an area where there were well, I guess that's not true. There were 200,000 people in our neighborhood and 4 evangelical churches, and I thought there were enough lost people to go around. So nobody complained when we planted a church where nobody else wanted to go. And so, yeah, well, it certainly wasn't in vogue then, but, we just believe that church planting is, I mean, when they received the Great Commission, Great Commission is given there in Matthew 28, the way the disciples responded was by planting churches. And so how could we not respond that way? Now, I do believe in church renewal, and I wrote a book on that. I believe, it's more than that. But I think the church has lost its church planting edge, and I think to some degree it's regaining it. There's a higher enthusiasm for church planting, but I think it needs to be on the heart and in the plans of evangelical churches and denominations across the world.
Yeah. So for you, really, it's about going somewhere where either there isn't much church or there's no church at all, starting something new, and seeing growth. And you're aiming what, for people to become Christians, or transfer growth, or a bit of both?
In church planting, our goal would be primarily to reach those who are far from Christ, those who are not believers. You do pick up some Christians along the way who want to be a part of something of that sort, but we worked hard to see people presented with the gospel and to respond who were not Christians. Now, I got to tell you, I live now here in the States in a place called Tennessee, and it's very different. Here, there's a lot of people who claim to be Christians who don't go to church. Most people around here are de-churched. Where I planted churches in New York and Pennsylvania, they were unchurched. And so there is a difference in that culture, and it's different, some ways more difficult, some ways less difficult. But my church planting has always been primarily, well, I guess we planted in Atlanta too. I planted a church a couple of years ago in Atlanta, which is more of a mixture. But yeah, my hope is that churches that are planted are not, just taking people from other churches. I don't see God's heart breaking so that we might steal sheep. I see Jesus looking over Jerusalem and saying they're like sheep without a shepherd. And I think ultimately you plant churches, see people come to Christ, and you be the shepherd of those people.